Welcome to the All Recovery Talk podcast, where we talk all things recovery and substance use related. We're your hosts. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Jennifer. This podcast was created for people in recovery, people with substance use disorders, allies of recovery, and everything in between.
Both Jennifer and I are in long term recovery and work at the only nationally recognized recovery community organization in North Dakota. Good afternoon, everybody. Another episode of All Recovery Talk. How are you today, Jennifer?
I am doing well. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great. This week's episode 6, we'll be discussing what does recovery mean.
Such a loaded question.
It is very loaded. So, I figured we'd start off by looking up.
Are you going to read the SAMHSA definition?
I'm going to read a definition. I can read multiple, but my main thing is just the dictionary's definition of recovery.
Okay.
Which is a return to a normal state of health, mind, or strength, or the action of process of regaining possession or control of something stolen or lost. Recovery.
That's interesting.
Yes.
I don't know if I like it. It's not bad, but I don't know if I love it.
Well, it is what it is.
It's true. There's a reason I don't write the dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
I think that recovery can mean so many different things, and there's so many different definitions.
Okay, so here's SAMHSA's. SAMHSA's definition of recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential.
Told you that's a good definition.
Much better definition.
Yeah. And for those of you who might not know, SAMHSA stands for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health
Services Administration.
Thank you.
Yep.
So close.
Yep. So close.
So those are the definitions, but what does recovery really mean?
I mean, that's up to the individual.
What does recovery mean to you, Kevin?
So recovery means to me living a happy, joyous, and free and successful life. Not living in constant fear or constant pain and misery, like I did during active addiction. It also means having relationships back that I had lost during active addiction, gaining new healthy relationships, being able to identify unhealthy relationships. Recovery means many different things to me today.
So can I ask you, does recovery mean abstinence for you?
For me, yes. My recovery is abstinence based, because I don't want to find out whether or not I can use one drug successfully, and have the chance of going back to using my drug of choice. It's just not worth it for me.
So another kind of probing question then, did your recovery start at the same day as your quote clean date, or is recovery did it start before, did it start after?
I would have to say for me, my recovery started after my clean date. About 62 days after my clean date.
62 days, huh?
Something like that, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, because, in this, it's either 61 or 62. My recovery started, I was abstinent based, while I was in treatment, and for 30 days out of treatment once I got home, but nothing had changed other than that. I still had the same thoughts, same behaviors, same thinking. You know, and it wasn't until uh, it was after a Monday night meeting that, I collected 60 days clean, and internally I wanted to die because I was still living in a self-made prison. Um, and my recovery started, I guess you could say in 60 days. It really started when I asked for help. I asked the meeting chair, for help because, I told him what was going on, and he said, "Well, do you have a sponsor and are you working steps?" And I said, "No, I don't have any of that." So that's what he suggested, was to get a sponsor and start working steps. And, me being me and still wanting shit immediately, that instant gratification, I asked him to be my sponsor. Um, because that's where I had that gift of desperation. And I wanted something different, because if it wasn't for him saying yes to being my sponsor, I probably wouldn't be here anymore. I probably would have went back out. Um, and he gave me my first assignment. So, um, I think things started to internally change on day 62 when I went over um, my assignment with him.
So you would say for you, recovery is really the process of changing.
Mm-hmm.
It includes abstinence,
Yes.
but it's more than just abstinence.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There for me, it's a lot more that goes into it than just not using drugs. I can not use drugs and still be the same douchebag I was when I was in active addiction. The only thing that changed was that I wasn't using drugs.
Right. As some people affectionately call it, dry drunks.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I think for me, my recovery started, and it's a little bit different than for you. It really did start when I started treatment. Um, I didn't maintain continuous abstinence, but I did start that process of my mindset changing and working on making progress. So it I I guess I didn't have to have that terrible 60 days that you did. Pretty grateful for that.
Well, your treatment facility was also a lot nicer than mine.
Hey, as far as I'm concerned, recovery is based on the effort you put in.
No, oh yeah, and I'm not saying that I didn't put effort in while I was in treatment, and I didn't learn things while I was in treatment, but treatment is treatment.
Mm-hmm.
You're in an environment where you're in a secure environment. It isn't real life, because you're being told what you do, when you're going to do it. You're not left to your own devices.
Right.
Yeah, I learned a lot of stuff, you could say, yeah, sure, my recovery in essence began while I was in treatment this last time, but it really started once I was on my own. And I really had to deal with life on life's terms.
Right.
Being by myself, not surrounded by others that are trying to, get better.
Right.
Not having staff there to tell me, hey, it's time to go to a meeting. Things like that, and being in a totally different geographical location where I couldn't just go to the gas station and see, my plug at the gas station. It wasn't going to happen while I was in treatment.
Right.
Since I was 107 miles away from where I normally, my normal stomping grounds. So yeah, treatment I did learn a lot of things. My recovery journey started while I was in treatment, but it really took off once I was back home and had to deal with myself.
Right.
So what does recovery mean to you, Jennifer?
I guess for me, it really is the process of changing and improving. Um, I guess I don't really have a solid definition, but it's a continuous process. It's not that
Oh,
Oh,
we
we
have a
got a puppy
we got a special
visiting.
guest, Ruger. Hi, Ruger. Yeah, hi, Ruger.
Oh, he's gonna want to see our baby.
Yeah,
That's what he's looking for.
yeah.
Um,
So it's a process. Mm-hmm. Hold on, we're gonna take a quick pause. Okay, the process. Yes, tell us about this process.
so for me, recovery is a process. It's not linear. And it is, there's a reason that we call it recovery and we don't say that we're recovered, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, it,
Well, for the most part, I mean, you get some people that say they've recovered, and I always want to be like, "Whoa, what'd you take? Where'd you get it? Where'd you get your recovered at?"
yeah. For me, it isn't. There isn't an end goal. It's a continuous process,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I mean, my first goal was, to maintain abstinence. But once I do that, there has to be more, like you were talking about. It for me, my recovery is continuing to grow. And that means so many different things in so many different ways. At first it was learning how to handle abstinence and mental health and all of that super fun stuff.
Yeah, it's a joy.
Yeah. And I mean, it continues to be handling mental health and all of that, but also how do I achieve my goals and like you were talking about, have healthy relationships and maintain what I consider to be a successful life. Um, and the challenges are always coming, and so recovery is being able to handle those challenges and work with them instead of against them, I guess, and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of continue on that self-directed life, as Samsa says.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that I've learned about recovery is that it's just not, you come in and I'm recovered. That I will be in recovery till the day I die.
Right.
Unless I so choose to go back out. But if I'm wanting to live in recovery, it will be an ongoing process. That it's not just all of a sudden that, oh, I don't need recovery anymore, that, I've been doing so well for so long that, I don't have to go to meetings, I don't have to have a sponsor, I don't have to work steps. Um, I know that, more often than not, that if I get that way and I start thinking that way, that I'm headed towards using.
So we should maybe note in this, in case people haven't listened to the other episodes, that your recovery is 12-step based.
Yes, mine is 12-step based 100%.
And that is how you. Well, do you want to explain how your 12-step program impacts your recovery? Why it is your definition of recovery?
So my my recovery is 12-step based because it is it has allowed me to um, learn how to manage my life. Working the steps in a 12-step program have allowed me to work on changing everything about my past. Um, and I don't mean changing my past mistakes, but changing my past self, the way that I used to live. Um, in essence, so that I can become the new me, a better me, version 2.0, shall we call it. 12-step based, allows me to go to the rooms anywhere that I am and feel at home. Because growing up, I didn't feel a part of really anything. I always felt like I was the odd man out. But when I go to a room in a 12-step based program, I feel at home. And I don't even have to know anybody that's in the room.
So it's kind of like community plus putting in the personal work.
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, it's allowed me the community connection. One of the things that through studies they've recognized that the community connection is a lot of the times what addicts lack. So they find that connection in the drug scene. So
Mhm.
then when they get into recovery, they have to find that community that is not using to be successful more often than not. Um, and that's where I get my community connection is in the rooms.
Mhm.
I mean, I met my wife in the rooms, you know, um, because I'm a firm believer in being friends with like-minded people because they can get where I'm coming from. I can't go talk to my parents about the fact of, that, when I was in active addiction, I was, using an 8 ball of drugs a day and them understand where I'm coming from.
Right. They have no basis
Yeah.
for what that means.
Yeah. But I can go to the rooms and be like, man, I want to do a 8 ball hot rail right now. And people go, man, I get that, and say that, you know, I want to stab somebody. And people are like, oh, man, I've been there too. I was there earlier, because they get where I'm coming from. Um, and to where uh, it has allowed me a freedom that I didn't have before, to be able to express myself with people understanding where I'm coming from.
I guess for I asked you about that because it's important that we recognize, that recovery doesn't look the same for everybody like we talked about.
No, it
Um
does not.
and so for me, my recovery, yes, I go to a 12-step program. And for me that's where my community part comes in. But I also, a part of my recovery is going to therapy and having a psychiatrist and having, you know, other supports, right? Like um there's now recovery CrossFit in town.
Mm-hmm. That's a
It
great event.
it might not be that big right now, but community could come from that. And in other
Yep.
places, um it does. That is a bigger community, right? So those are like-minded individuals too. And so for me at least, I have to do these different things. Like I'm very grateful for 12-step programs, don't get me wrong, but I can honestly say that if there was another place to get the community, to find other people in recovery and be able to kind of share those things like you were talking about, I don't know that I would say that, you know, a 12-step program is the way that I would go. And I can't say that either way because the fact is that that is what there is right now,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I don't want to take away from other places where they do have things like all recovery meetings and
Yeah.
peer support groups and all sorts of events where people in recovery get together.
Yeah.
And I
Like
can't
we do.
speculate on, yeah, like we do. I can't speculate on what my life would have been like if there had been different services because the fact is there wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, nowadays we talk like we're so old and we've been in recovery for forever, but
I mean, I've been in recovery for a hot minute. I mean, I am an old timer.
oh
I
yeah.
noticed the other day when we were at a meeting, I had the most clean time there. It was like, this is not fun.
Oh.
Nah, I don't
Um
like being that guy.
but now you made me lose my train of thought. But now in this new day and age that there is, and we might be kind of far behind in North Dakota, but there are truly other things that have come up
Yeah.
that people use as their recovery, and some people might be in communities where there are not 12-step meetings and there are things that they could do to be successful without that.
Oh, yeah, there's many different pathways to recovery.
Yeah.
I know people that go to church, they found God, and,
Mm-hmm.
never worked 12 steps. They found God, and their lives have become 1,000 times better.
Right. And
And,
they use that as the way
yeah,
to improve their
yeah,
lives.
and then I know people that utilize harm reduction, that or they go to Wellbriety, they go to all recovery meetings, they go to Celebrate Recovery, there's Smart Recovery, there's AA, there's NA, there's all the A's, that
All the
all the
A's.
A's, there are many different options nowadays.
And there's, exercise
Yeah.
as a way or straight up
Yeah,
therapy.
meditation, yoga, fitness. There's so many different pathways to recovery. It's finding what works for you.
Right.
Like when I was on probation, there wasn't free through recovery. Where there is now, where people that have that many more resources that they can utilize to find recovery, people that are in recovery to work with, to assist them to finding recovery. You
Right.
know, there's so many more opportunities today than there was when I was in active addiction. So I don't understand why there ain't more people clean. There should
Well,
be.
I think, I don't know, and this is just assuming, which we don't like to do, but
No, I don't do that.
there seems to be this kind of misconception, and that's why we have this on our board here for the podcast, that recovery is supposed to look like a 12-step program. It
Yeah,
is
that's
supposed to
abstinence
be that.
based only. Yeah.
And even if you are abstinence based, right, there are so many different ways
Mhm.
to do that. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be AA or NA,
Yeah.
which I think is where, traditionally that was the only place that people with substance use disorders could go.
Yep. Pretty much. Yeah.
And so we're in this point of transition as a whole in this country to looking at, what can recovery look like and what constitutes recovery. And, people are still getting sentenced to going to 12-step meetings.
Yep.
So
Checks out.
if that doesn't work for you, and I'm not going to speculate on specific 12-step programs, but if you're sentenced to a program that doesn't work for you, I could see why you wouldn't stay in recovery and keep up with stuff like that if you think that's the only way.
Yeah. That's so. That's the one thing. That 5 years ago, harm reduction wasn't considered recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Harm reduction was considered you're just using.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until the recovery capital model came out, that they started looking more at how harm reduction is recovery. Because they also started looking at, how one defines recovery is independent. Not one person's recovery is the same.
Right.
Like the why I read the dictionary's definition and then also read SAMHSA's. Two totally different perspectives on what recovery means. Just like my perspective on what recovery means to me is different than what Jennifer's does. Harm reduction is, which we'll get into more later in a different episode, I believe, is how it is exactly what it is. Harm reduction is how one defines their recovery.
Mm-hmm.
With the premise behind harm reduction being that, if my disease is that I drink a fifth of Jack a day, to then in turn I'm drinking a beer a day, well, that's harm reduction. With the
Right.
premise that eventually I go from drinking just that one beer a day to like, well, why do I drink one beer a day? When I could just have a couple beers on the weekend.
Right.
And then next thing you know, I'm just like, why do I drink a couple beers on the weekend? What do I get out of this? And then I just quit drinking. Is the idea behind it. And at no point during any of that is one not in recovery.
Right.
That was a very hard thing for me to grasp when I worked at the state facility running peer support group. That was one of the things that they premised a lot was talking about harm reduction. And I'm abstinence based only, to where, there was an individual I was talking with one day during group, and, they were telling me about how when they get done with group, they go home and they drink like 3 beers. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you're not in recovery. And then, but then, I thought to myself, well, I asked the question, I was like, well, what were you normally drinking? And he goes, a fifth of Jack a day. And I'm like, oh, okay, so you're utilizing harm reduction. He's just like, yeah, why? And I'm like, well, because I'm abstinence based only. So I'm thinking in my head, well, you're not in recovery. But now that you're telling me that, you're drinking 3 beers instead of a fifth of Jack a day. Well, to me, that's showing that your definition of recovery is you drink 3 beers instead of a fifth.
Right. And we have to be open-minded.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a community, and broadly using the word community, meaning both the recovery community and society as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
we might not be as open-minded as, those of us who are working in this profession.
Oh no, not at all. That's like, oh, you're an alcoholic versus, oh, you're a drug addict. Oh my God, get away from me.
Mm-hmm.
That stigma. It's just like an alcohol. Yeah, I could say I'm an alcoholic all I want. And people just say, oh, okay, whatever. But if I say I'm a drug addict, then people look at me like I'm carrying a plague because of the stigma. That's the difference between, abstinence based and harm reduction. In essence, the way people look at it, because people look at like, oh, you're abstinence based? Oh, okay, alcoholic, sure. Okay. And then, oh, I practice harm reduction. Oh, really, dude? Oh, see, eventually when you're, back to doing what you're doing.
Well, I mean, and I think a lot of people don't even know what harm reduction means.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's something that we'll get into
Yeah,
later,
yeah.
but all of this stuff, I think what the point that we're trying to talk about here is that there's more than one way to recover.
Oh, yeah.
And that recovery means so much more than just simple abstinence.
Yep. Oh, yes.
It, because abstinence it's fine, right? But like you kind of talked about it, that if you're abstinent and you're not doing anything to improve your life, it's just misery.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was. I mean, it was the only thing that had changed was that the lack of drugs.
Right. And there's a reason that people use substances.
Yep.
Right? It's generally, as a very general, broad definition, it's to change their emotions, change the way they feel. I mean, that's exactly what substances do.
Yeah. Pretty much, yes. That's one of the many reasons I used, was because I didn't like the way I felt. Or it wasn't even really the fact that what I was feeling. It was just that I was just feeling in general, and I didn't want to deal with that. So I numbed that little sector. Just like, nope, no more feelings. That's out for vacation.
Right. And that's why, from my perspective, recovery requires this process of change.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak for all 12-step programs, but the steps in a general way are meant to look at why you're using the substance and how you can cope with things differently. And I know that's a broad generalization, and there are 12 steps, so obviously that's not what every step is about.
No.
But it really is figuring out how you can live differently without having to use those substances.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're talking about recovery in a more broad way, it's talking about what we're doing differently to not have to use substances.
Mm-hmm.
And do you maybe want to share, I know you shared a little bit, but why you chose abstinence-based? Was there a reason? Is there a reason that you continue to choose that?
So I mean, it was the only option at the time. There wasn't no talk about harm reduction. There wasn't celebrate recovery. There wasn't smart recovery. It was 12-step based programs, which are abstinence only. That I got introduced to while I was in treatment. And I loved what I heard. Hearing people share, in essence, my story and, the life that they live now and in the way they present themselves and carry themselves was all things that I wanted. So it was, and I know that, I could get my green card, my marijuana card. I could easily, but I don't. I choose not to, because of the fear that eventually knowing me as a person and my disease, that eventually I'll probably end up going back to my drug of choice because I'm putting a foreign substance into my body to alter my mood in my thought process. That mood changing, mind altering substance. I didn't really have a problem with alcohol. I choose still not to go drink alcohol because of that factor of, I don't want it to possibly lead me back to where I used to be.
Okay. So, would you say, and this is a maybe funny question, would you say that you choose abstinence now because you feel that it's your only option,
It's the
or
only way.
that
It's currently my only way.
is it fear?
It's not necessarily fear, as it's just prior knowledge
So
that
based
I
on your
substitute. Yes,
experience.
that I substitute one for another.
Okay.
Just like when I was on, I used to be on ADHD medication. I used to be on mental health medications. Um, you know, that when I first started taking ADHD medications again, that through trial and error of my ADHD medications, there were certain medications that made me super jittery. Like I don't drink caffeine after 5 o'clock. I barely even drink caffeine anymore, because I don't like the way it makes me feel. Because it reminds me of who I used to be, and I don't want to be that person anymore. So I make that decision not to indulge in it. Just like I don't take pre-workout, for the simple fact of there's so much caffeine in pre-workout that I'm sorry, I don't want to feel like I'm cracked out while I'm trying to work out.
Yeah.
you know, that and I don't work out until, generally after work. So I would, I'd take some of that and I'd be up for, the next 3 days.
Yeah, that checks out.
So, that's that prior knowledge of who I used to be is still there. And so when things enter my body that make me feel a certain type of way, it's just like, nope, not doing that again.
I think for me, the reason that I choose abstinence based is less out of fear. I mean, there was definitely that in the beginning, but now I have no reason to want to use substances. I've
Hmm.
had people ask me, my therapist included, whether I think I could, have a glass of wine with dinner or whatever. And
Probably could, but
yeah, exactly. I
sure.
probably could, but why why do I want to spend $9 on a glass of wine when I could just get a water or a soda?
Yeah.
Right? Like what is the purpose of that? It's not enhancing my life. It's not enhancing my health.
Yeah.
I mean, they say that red wine is good for your health and everything, but you get the same benefits from grape juice. So like it
The non-fermented version.
yeah. So there's no good reason for me to. And the only time I ever think about it is when I do want to change my feelings,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what recovery means to me. I probably could use substances and be fine at least for a while.
Yeah.
But
That's
why?
that's the question: is how long?
Yes, there's that too, and we don't have to get quite
Yeah.
into that. But um that's what recovery is for me, is getting to a point where I don't need something to change my feelings. However, I will say antidepressants and all of those are fine in my experience. I don't think that those are bad as long as you're using them correctly. If
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
chopping up and sniffing some antidepressants, then you might need to do something else. But
Okay. So we reached our time for the day. So Jennifer, what's the call of action for today?
go like our Facebook page, share it with your friends.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week. You guys have a great weekend. Stay dry.